Back in October of 1962, for 13 straight days, 13 whole days, the world basically stopped. Everyone was holding their breath because we were this close to all-out nuclear war. So today, we're going to unpack the Cuban Missile Crisis. We'll look at how we got there, and more importantly, how we managed to pull back from the very, very edge. But you know what? We're not going to start at the beginning. No, let's jump right into the thick of it, right into the most intense, most dangerous day of the entire crisis. We're talking about October 27th. Because deep under the ocean, the fate of the entire world, literally, was in the hands of one man. And it all came down to him saying a single word: no. So get this. There's a Soviet submarine, the B-59, and it's carrying a nuclear torpedo. The US Navy has it cornered, but they don't know about the nuke. So they start dropping these small depth charges, not to destroy it, but just to signal it to come to the surface. Well, inside that sub, things are tense. They're totally cut off from Moscow, communications are down, the captain thinks World War III has started, he and another officer, they agree, it's time to launch. But here's the thing, it had to be a unanimous decision between 3 senior officers. And the third guy, Vasily Arkhipov, he just says no. His no literally stopped a nuclear launch that would have, without a doubt, started a full-blown nuclear war. So the question is, how did we even get here? How did we get to a point where one man in a submarine was the only thing standing between all of us and total annihilation? All right, to figure that out, we've got to go back a bit. Let's rewind the clock to right after World War II. The world was a mess, the old powers were shattered, and a brand new and frankly terrifying game of global chess was just getting started. So you've got 2 major players on the board. In one corner, you have the United States and the Western Bloc. Their whole deal, capitalism. And their main goal was to stop the spread of communism. In the other corner, you have the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Their ideology, communism. And their goal, well, pretty much the exact opposite, to spread it everywhere. This wasn't just some political disagreement, you know? This was a clash of 2 completely different ways of seeing the world, and both sides were locked in a fight for who would control the future. And that massive struggle, well, that's what we call the Cold War. Now, it was cold because the 2 superpowers, the US and the USSR, never actually went to war directly with each other. But make no mistake, it was absolutely a war. It was fought through proxy wars in other countries, through spies, and, the really scary part, through an absolutely insane arms race. Both sides just kept building more and more nuclear weapons, creating this constant, terrifying feeling that the world could end at any moment. Okay, so you have this global tension, this threat hanging over everyone's heads. But for the United States, it was about to get really, really personal. And it was all because of a tiny island, just 90 miles from the Florida coast. We're talking, of course, about Cuba. You see, for a long, long time, Cuba was basically under America's thumb. The US had huge influence over its economy, its politics, you name it. And not surprisingly, that created a lot of anger. So in 1959, a guy named Fidel Castro leads a revolution. He kicks out the corrupt dictator that the US had been supporting and starts taking back control of Cuban businesses from American companies. Now, how did the US respond? With the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. A failed attempt to overthrow him. And all that did was make Castro even more popular and, well, it pushed him right into an alliance with the Soviet Union. And the pressure from the US was just relentless. Get this number, 634. That's how many times the CIA allegedly tried to assassinate Fidel Castro under something called Operation Mongoose. And the methods, they were straight out of a spy movie. We're talking poisoned cigars, exploding seashells. I'm not kidding. So when you've got your giant neighbor trying to kill you over and over, what do? It's really no wonder Castro turned to the other superpower, the Soviet Union, for a little bit of backup. And this new friendship between Cuba and the Soviet Union, well, it was about to set the stage for an absolutely terrifying escalation. Suddenly, the Cold War wasn't so cold anymore, because nuclear missiles were about to show up right on America's doorstep. Now, this is super important. This didn't just come out of nowhere. The US had already put its own nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy, basically pointing right at Moscow. So the Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, he looked at Cuba and thought, hey, here's my chance to even things out and protect my new friend Castro. So in total secrecy, the USSR starts sneaking missiles into Cuba. And then it happens. On October 14th, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flies over, takes some pictures, and there it is. America's worst nightmare confirmed. Soviet nuclear missiles, powerful enough to hit almost any city in the United States, were being set up just off the coast. So suddenly, President John F. Kennedy is facing this unbelievable choice. What does he do? An airstrike? That could start a war. A full-on invasion? That could start a nuclear war. So he threads the needle. He goes for a middle ground. He announces a naval quarantine around Cuba. The idea was to stop any more Soviet ships with weapons from getting through. And that word, quarantine, was so important. See, calling it a blockade is legally an act of war. Quarantine sounded less aggressive. It was a way to look strong without actually starting the fight. And that's when the clock started ticking on those 13 days. The whole world was glued to their TVs, watching these Soviet ships sail right towards the American quarantine line. It was an international game of chicken. But at the same time, behind closed doors, there were these frantic, secret negotiations going on, trying to find a way out of this mess. All that tension, it just kept building and building until it hit an absolute fever pitch on October 27th, a day we now call Black Saturday. This was the day we came as close as we have ever been to nuclear war. I mean, think about this. All on one day, an American spy plane gets shot down over Cuba and the pilot is killed. The US military goes to DEFCON 2. That's the highest alert level before you actually launch the nukes. It's the only time in history that's ever happened, for sure. And yeah, remember that submarine we talked about? That happened on Black Saturday too. Things were just spiraling out of control, and those secret talks between JFK's brother, Robert Kennedy, and the Soviet ambassador, they became absolutely desperate. And then they did it. They struck a deal. Now, here's what everyone was told. The Soviets would take their missiles out of Cuba, and in return, the US would promise to never, ever invade Cuba. But there was a secret part of the deal, a part nobody knew about for more than 25 years. The US also promised to quietly remove its own missiles from Turkey and Italy. And that secret part was the key to the whole thing. It let Khrushchev go back home and say, hey, this wasn't a surrender, it was a compromise, which allowed him to save face. So the world breathes a collective sigh of relief. We were saved. But for Kennedy and Khrushchev, the two guys who actually made it happen, well, the political cost of making peace turned out to be incredibly high. It's actually kind of a tragic paradox. Over in the Soviet Union, the hardliners were furious. They saw what Khrushchev did as a total humiliation. Since nobody knew the US was also removing missiles, it just looked like he backed down and got nothing for it. That reputation for being weak pretty much cost him his job. He was kicked out of power just 2 years later. And Kennedy? Publicly, he was a hero. He was the guy who stared down the Soviets and won. But behind the scenes, his own military leaders were ripping him apart for being too soft. They wanted him to invade, not make a deal. It's incredible when you think about it. The two men who saved the world were seen as weak by the powerful people on their own sides for doing it. But there was a silver lining to all of this. After staring right into the abyss, both the US and the USSR realized they could never, ever let this happen again. They needed to be able to talk to each other. So in 1963, they set up the famous hotline between Moscow and Washington for direct communication. And they signed the Limited Nuclear Ban Treaty, which was really the first real step towards getting the arms race under control. And all this really brings us to one last big question, a question for right now. The Cuban Missile Crisis was solved because, at the end of the day, two enemies, under unimaginable pressure, chose to find a peaceful solution instead of letting their pride lead them into war. So you have to ask yourself, in the world we live in today, with all its tensions, could we trust our leaders to do the same thing? To choose peace over pride? It's definitely something worth thinking about.